My name's Ian Bennett, Senior Manager, International Trade, Australian Business Consulting Solutions. Today we're here to talk about the new agreement with Japan relating to international trade, and I have with me the Director of Trade and International Affairs, Brian Clark, from the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Welcome, Brian.
Hello, Ian.
So, Brian, the Prime Ministers of both countries have initialled an agreement between Japan and Australia. I believe this has been a long time coming, but we've had a pretty substantial history with Japan. Could you elaborate on that for us, please?
Thanks, Ian. Japan's one of our major trading partners, and for the last 50 years we've been working together. It's commenced in our commercial sense with the Commercial Cooperation Agreement in 1957, and since then Japan's raised its profile so that it's been our largest and still remains our second largest trading partner. Yet we've now entered the next phase with this agreement so that we can go forward from the base that we've created onto the next platform.
Brian, we've have a number of words that go around these agreements. Why is this not called a free trade agreement, instead an economic partnership agreement?
Well, thanks, Ian. It's probably a better naming for an agreement. Free trade agreements often give people the wrong impression. In fact, none of them are free trade. They are always preferential trade agreements where tariffs are applied and reduced over a particular amount of time. But the preferential bit is that they are between the two parties for the agreement. So calling this one an economic partnership agreement is probably a better name for what it really is. It is about economic partnership rather than necessarily about having an endpoint which is about free trade per se. It's also quite wide and comprehensive in its coverage, and so sometimes the original agreements can just be about the trade aspects, whereas this one covers much more than that, includes trade in services and as well as goods and investment. So it's a very comprehensive agreement which should benefit and from which we should be able to build better partnerships.
So this agreement will cover the entire business community?
It may not be every business, but most of the sectors, yes.
Thanks. When people hear about trade agreements, they always seem to prefer to talk about the exporting community as opposed to the importing community. Most agreements are bilateral and have benefits for both. Now, under this new Japan Economic Partnership Agreement, are there benefits for both sides, both the importers and the exporters?
Oh, there certainly is, Ian, and people need to remember as well that most of the benefit from an economic partnership agreement or any free trade agreement are in fact domestic improvements, and there needs to be a domestic reform package which goes with this. But fundamentally there's a reduction of tariffs on both sides, and so from the Australian perspective we'll remove a number of the existing tariffs. Australia is a very low tariff regime already, but the Japanese will increasingly remove their tariffs on some of the things where there have been very high tariffs, particularly food products, and that will be of great benefit to the Australian economy over time.
But for the Australian consumer, I guess we're looking at reduction in electronics, white goods, motor vehicles.
Things which are produced in Japan and which are complying with the agreement, which come into the Australian economy, such as those that you've listed, will be cheaper to the Australian community because they won't have the tariff applying. And the other thing that we'll see is improved investment. And so the improvement of Australia as an inbound destination for investment will also see over time jobs and other things in the Australian economy.
Well, thanks, Brian. Brian, there's been a lot of media around about this economic partnership. It seems that various sectors of the Australian exporting community will have substantial benefits. Could you sort of elaborate on some of these key export products?
And it's a comprehensive agreement, and so the benefits are going to flow across a wide range of the Australian economy. The agricultural sector has wide benefits, the minerals sector, the services sector. We're going to see a lot of opportunities with this. On entry into force, some of the tariffs, which have been very high in Japan, come down quite substantially over the first couple of years and then plateau out more over time. But there's a lot of benefits for the seafood sector, for the wine sector, a number of agricultural products, meat products. We'll see a lot of benefits in those ones in particular. but then new market opportunities in the services sector for legal services, financial services, even people involved in building like architects and others will be able to have better market opportunities from this agreement.
Right, thank you, Ron. Australia has a number of bilateral and multilateral free trade agreements, which in most cases gives the Australian exporter an advantage in those markets, or it produces a level playing field. Now, I understand that the US have not yet signed a free trade agreement or any sort of agreement with Japan. What sort of advantage does that give the Australian exporter?
Thanks, Ian. The difference will give Australian exporters an early mover advantage in the marketplace because other countries don't have such an agreement. This is the first agreement that Japan has done with an advanced country, and so other countries are trying to negotiate with Japan but will have a time advantage in the marketplace, and so Australian exporters and service providers will be able to establish themselves more in the marketplace in advance of other competitive countries. We have, of course, the negotiations for the Trans-Pacific Partnership going on, and that will open up a different amount of exporters from other countries who will be partners to that agreement, but we'll have to wait and see where that one goes and how much advantage there is from that one before being able to say any more about it.
Right, so the key message for Australian exporters is to start getting their platforms built, trading in Japan right now, and get it consolidated before there are other entrants through other agreements.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, Australian exporters need to be on the wagon quickly with this one to take advantage of it and get a foothold, cement themselves as the preferred supplier in the marketplace.
Right. The Prime Ministers have visited each other's countries, they've initialed the agreement. The media's out there, everybody's expecting this to happen tomorrow. Is there a timeline on this?
Certainly, and that's one of the things business needs to be aware of. It shouldn't curtail their interest, and they should be moving in the marketplace now to establish their relationships. But there is a time horizon, and it's got to go through both houses of Parliament. There's a scrutiny process, what they call legal scrubbing of the text, to make sure it's an agreement in a readable form. And then it goes through, in the Australian context, a process through what's called the Joint Standing Committee on Treaties. Parliament then assesses it, and subject to it being agreed by both houses of Parliament, it will then have entry into force, and we expect that to be sometime in 2015. But the important message for business is to start now so that they're ready to go on day one of entry into force.
Yeah, that's a good point, Brian, because we know that it's traditionally difficult to get quick action out of Japanese companies. They like to look at things, digest things, think about it and come back to you. So the decision-making process in Japan is not always the fastest thing, but it looks like we've got some breathing space to get ourselves established.
And Japan, much like many markets in Asia, rely on relationships. So that's the time taken to understand your partners, to identify the right ones, and then build confidence between yourself and your counterparty. That's most important, so start early.
So once again, the message is Australian exporters, start booking plane trips and start thinking about your strategies on how you're going to get into this market and what sort of resources are available to help you get there. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope this session has been a benefit for you. I'd like to thank Brian Clark, the Director of Trade and International Affairs from Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you, Brian, for being here this morning. And finally, if you'd like to keep up with how this approval process and the implementation of this economic partnership agreement is progressing, you can watch it through our YouTube channel, through our website, and through Australian Trade Link's website. We look forward to helping you in this journey of becoming a first mover advantage into the Japan market. Thank you.